Hi, everyone. Welcome to our February Q&A with an expert. This month, we're featuring Shri, and I'm super excited for the conversation we're going to have today about following your curiosity and also working on personal creative projects. And I'll pass it over to Shri to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. So thanks, Simran, for the introduction, and thanks to DVS for giving us this space today. So my name is Shri Khalpada. I'm a software engineer who, over the last few years, has gotten really into the world of data visualization, and creative side projects were kind of my path to getting into this world. And so I'm really excited to talk about my journey, walk through some projects, and then try to leave you with some tips that have worked well for me in terms of how you can approach creative data projects.
Thank you so much for your time. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the comments section, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. All right, I'll pass it over to you to start your presentation.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. And I have a pretty easy way to look at the comments that are coming in live. So feel free to ask any questions you have along the way, and I'll try to do my best to answer them. Okay. So just to confirm, Simran, are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
Here we go.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, so like I said, my name is Shri, and today I'm going to talk about following your curiosity with creative data projects. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about my journey through my career. I want to walk through a few creative projects that I've done in the past. I want to chat a bit about how I approach technical decisions and which tools to use. I want to talk a bit about how to get into a creative mindset when it comes to data, and then hopefully plenty of time at the end for Q&A. Okay, so starting with my journey. So I actually had a pretty traditional computer science education. From the University of Maryland, I got my BS in computer science. Then I moved out to the West Coast in the US to Seattle, working at Microsoft. So at Microsoft, I was a software engineer working on the operating system and specifically improving Windows for the classroom to make it leaner and more streamlined for teachers and students to use in the classroom. Then I moved back east in the US back to DC, and I started working for a mid-sized company that actually got acquired by MasterCard. So I was doing a lot of fintech type of work there. And for a couple years there, I was the technical lead for a dashboarding project. So we built a dashboard, like a SaaS product that essentially helped companies monitor the performance of various campaigns they were running. And that's really where I got to dip my toes into data. Then in 2021, I started a data visualization website focused around sports. So this was called PerThirtySix, and I'll chat more about the origin story of that project in the next couple slides. But doing that side project led to me getting the job that I currently have, which is as a software engineer for a tiny 3-person company called Cleaning the Glass, where I work on building analytics tools for NBA teams. And we also build tools for the public at large, but a lot of my work has been focused around teams. And then since then, over the last couple of years, I've continued doing all kinds of various creative coding projects and creative data projects. It's just become a big hobby of mine, and I find it just very therapeutic to go to a coffee shop and work on an idea that I have in my head and get it to a point where I can share it with the world. So that's just something that has become a big hobby of mine. So the big inflection point for me in my career was really around 2021, when I started to have second thoughts about my career path. So I would always love being a tinkerer and somebody who solves problems and builds things. But doing that professionally, I I think I was just kind of at a point where I was like, is this really what I want to do for 30 odd years? It was easy at big companies to feel a little bit like a cog in a machine, and it was a bit creatively stifling. That being said, I'm like really grateful that I had those great jobs to start my career, and I worked and learned from really, really smart people. But I was just kind of like at a point where I don't know, maybe it was like a quarter life crisis or something in my mid-20s. So this was right around the time that the pandemic was happening. So that gave me a lot of unexpected free time, which I wanted to try to use to reignite that love for coding and data and building things. And my thought process was, if I try to do a side project and I really love it, then maybe that'll like validate, the career path I'm on. And if I don't love it, then that's also a really helpful data point that maybe this is just not something that is like my long-term career. So I reached out to one of my really good friends who I went to college with, named Rob Moore, who's a really talented software engineer and D3 data viz designer. And I just asked him if he wanted to build some data visualizations around sports. So this was an idea that we had for a really long time, like dating back to college, where we would just start a blog and we would create these data visualizations around sports. So he was into that idea. So we did a bit of brainstorming, and the first thing we kind of noticed is that we had pretty complementary skill sets. So at MasterCard, I had gained a little bit of experience doing data viz, but a lot of experience building data pipelines. And Rob had a lot of experience doing D3 freelancing. So we thought that we had a pretty good set of skills that we could combine, where I could build a data pipeline and Rob could build visualizations, and combining those together, we would have these visualizations that would update every day as the basketball season progressed. We also noticed an opportunity in that there was a big gap between the amount of publicly available NBA data and the visualizations that were being built around it. So for example, if you are a fan of sports, you might have heard of this thing called a hustle statistic. And so a hustle stat basically aims to capture like how hard a player is playing, like how fast they're running, how much they're running, how much they're diving for loose balls and things like that. And I was very surprised to learn that the NBA had a lot of statistics around this kind of stuff, but it was like very deeply buried on like the NBA stats website. So we thought that it would be a really cool opportunity to build visualizations around some of that type of data. And just to clarify, like if you're doing a creative data project, I don't think you need to do this type of like market testing to validate your idea. But in our case, it just seemed like a really, really cool opportunity. And then I think it's also really helpful to think of non-goals. So for us, neither of us at the time were experts on the game of basketball. So we explicitly didn't want to do like long form content around basketball strategy, or sometimes people call it X's and O's. And just coming up with these constraints, I think really help you focus on what it is you actually want to build, which in our case were these like beautiful bespoke visualizations that would update every day around this kind of interesting data that was kind of underutilized. So after about a month of a lot of like nights and weekends work, we launched the first version of PerThirtySix.com. So these are some of the interactive visualizations that we launched with. On the left here, we have a bunch of B-swarm charts around like really common NBA statistics and where players rank among them. And on the right, we have our passing wheel visualization. So each one of these chord diagrams shows the flow of passing among players on an NBA team. And I'm happy to dive more into some of these visualizations if anyone's interested in the Q&A. So at this point, we were pretty excited about what we were building. We had shared our work on social media, which is always a bit of a double-edged sword. But we were happy with the reception we were getting. And at that point, I was really excited about where we could take this project. So I cold emailed a bunch of well-known people in this kind of niche of NBA analytics. And only one person replied back. and that was Ben Falk, who Ben Falk had previously worked leading analytics teams for a few different NBA teams. And in 2017, he had quit working for NBA teams and started his own website and company called Cleaning the Glass. And it just so happened that he was hiring for his first full-time hires for his company. And we ended up having a really great conversation. He ended up interviewing me, and we decided it would be a good fit. And so that's where I've been since 2021. So as I reflect back on, I guess, the first 10 years of my career, I think the biggest takeaway is that to break into an industry like sports analytics or whatever your dream job might be, the most common thing I've seen in people's journeys is that you have to set yourself up to have good luck, and then you actually have to get lucky. So in my case, I set myself up to have good luck by coming up with this portfolio with my friend and doing all of that work to show that I could do the job before I actually had the job, and then also reaching out to people. But then there also was this element of also getting lucky. And if I had sent that cold email a few months earlier or a few months later, maybe it wouldn't have aligned, and maybe I wouldn't have broken into this this type of work. So yeah, I think you can do your best to increase your luck surface area, but you still it still requires some amount of luck. So it's kind of hard to come up with reproducible advice, but that's the most common pattern I've seen. Okay. Yeah, next I'd love to walk through some of the creative data projects I've done over the last few years. So the first one I want to talk about is my project called the Visual Wordle Solver. So if you're not familiar with Wordle, it's a game that blew up here in the US a few years ago. So it's a word game where you essentially have 6 chances to guess a 5-letter word. And after each guess, it'll reveal to you which letters are green, yellow, and gray. So green means that your letter is correctly placed in the word. Yellow means that the letter is there, but somewhere else in the word. And gray means that the letter isn't in the word at all. So this is a screenshot of one of my Wordle games a couple weeks ago. So I try to play Wordle every day, to this day. And in 2023, when I was getting into playing Wordle, I just found myself really curious about the different types of patterns that would show up in the solutions. So for example, which letters tend to appear together, which letters show up in certain positions, and things like that. And I had seen visualizations that look like this before. So this is a bigram that basically shows how letters in the English language connect to each other. And you could extend this to words, to symbols, basically anything that you can place sequentially in an order. So this reveals some cool patterns, like T is often followed by H, T is often followed by O, H is often followed by E. And I just think it's a really cool exploratory way to visualize that data. And this was basically exactly what I wanted to do for Wordle. So I spent some time and I came up with this static visualization. So the way to read this is that it's essentially a heat map and a network diagram in one. So the heat map part is that the greenness of each square represents how often that letter shows up in that position among all Wordle solutions. So for example, you can see that S most commonly shows up as the first letter. It doesn't really show up that often as the second letter or the fourth or the fifth letter. But R is a very common second letter. And in addition to the colors, the lines show you the prominence of each connection. So you can see that this L to L connection stands out. So that's a pretty common third and fourth letter. Same with O to O, etc. And there's a lot of words that end in Y, which I thought was interesting. So I thought this was a really cool start to a visualization, but I thought it was missing the ability to come back to it each day. So like I was just thinking, if I shared this visualization and I saw it, I think I would think, oh, that's really cool, and then like never think about it again or never look at it again. Whereas if I could somehow make this more engaging and more dynamic, then it could be something that people like use every day. So I did some thinking and I thought if I could get people to select the green, the yellow, and the gray letters, it could make the visualization much more engaging. So the way I was thinking about it was I could essentially have a bunch of inputs go into the visualization. Like in this case, maybe that C is in the first position and it's green. These other letters are yellow, and then R is gray. So those would be the inputs, and then the output would be a visualization that highlights all of the words that fulfill that set of filters, which in this case is just one. And so I built that visualization, and I'd love to demo it for you. And I'll leave this up for a second in case you wanted to try it out on your phone or something. Awesome. Okay, so this is the visual Wordle Solver. So I ended up adding multimodal input to this visualization. So you can use your mouse to hover over the canvas, and you can also click to lock in letters into place. But then you can also use your keyboard below the visualization to type in the green letters. And this also has the advantage of A, it's way more accessible, so it's like keyboard navigation friendly, and B, it gives you a way to input the yellow and the gray letters. So right. So yeah, that's how you'd use it. It's super dynamic, which I love. I'm a big fan of like interactive exploratory data visualizations. Yeah, so that's that project. Come back here. This actually ended up being like by far my most popular visualization that I've shared. It hit the front page of Reddit and #1 on Hacker News. And yeah, it was just kind of funny because I've made visualizations where I thought, oh, like people are gonna love this and it's gonna like go viral or whatever, and it never does. And then this one that I just kind of like built like totally for fun ended up being the most popular one. So yeah, you just never know how that's gonna go. Great. Next, I want to talk about a project I did last year called the Communal Plot. So the inspiration for this one actually came from an office I used to work at a couple years ago. And one of our office traditions was that we had a whiteboard where either myself or a couple of my coworkers would put up these scatter plots on the whiteboard that kind of ask two questions. So in this case, it's are you a night owl or an early bird versus how much do you like coffee? And people would just go about their day, and when they had time or when they happened to pass by the whiteboard, they would pick up a marker and kind of annotate where they were on those spectrums. And so this is like kind of a very fun, quirky office tradition that we had, like very low stakes, but just kind of fun to see where people were. And I always had this idea that this would be really cool to try to recreate digitally. Doing it digitally would open up a lot of opportunities. Like people from around the world could engage with it. You could add like automatic analytics about where people are, answering. And you can make fun ways to share your response. You could really like socialize and gamify this experience. It also added a lot of challenges. So unlike most data visualizations that I've worked on, most data visualizations are kind of like, here's your data and you're reading from it and displaying it. Whereas this one was very much like, here's your data, you can read from it, but then you also write back to it. So that like two-way sort of communication for data viz was opened up some technical problems that I just like had never thought about in data viz. And there was also like, I was concerned about privacy a little bit. Like I didn't want to hold like all this information about people in terms of like, having all these answers and like having to have like, think about like GDPR and things like that. So there were all kinds of things I had to kind of navigate through when planning this project. So it was really helpful to kind of aggressively scope out the features and the constraints before I wrote a single line of code for this project. And broadly, the feature set I landed on were these 5 bullet points. So one was I didn't want to have any login, which was a good idea, I think, in hindsight for 2 reasons. One, it kind of sidesteps the whole privacy and managing users' answers problem because there's no way to tie back an answer to any user. And 2, it keeps the experience like very low friction, insofar as you can just open this website and tap on it and you don't have to do anything else. The second feature was I wanted to make it a daily game, which I was probably inspired by Wordle and all the other New York Times games. I just thought that would be like a fun way to keep this fresh and just to make it more engaging and dynamic, instead of just being like one question or user submitted questions or anything like that. I wanted to add some analytics to this. The big one I was thinking about was like an automatic trend line that shows you if there's a correlation between the 2 answers or the 2 questions. And then also things like where are people answering from, like some clustering and stuff like that. I wanted there to be a text share, because that's something that in my like chats with my friends, I've noticed that that's something that the New York Times games do really well. I just think it's like super lightweight to do a text share versus like an image share. So I'll show you what that looks like for the communal plot in a second. And the 5th feature that I was really excited about was guessing. So I thought it'd be really cool if you could send some kind of link to your friend and have them guess where you answered on the plot, just to kind of see like how well your friends know you. Great. So I'll leave this QR code up for a second. This one will be fun because we'll get everybody answering in real time. Okay. Great. So this is the communal plot. You'll notice that at the top, you can go back and answer any plot since the project was started back in May. I actually used the prompt from the example today because I couldn't think of a better one. So for me, I'm more of an early bird these days, and I do enjoy my coffee, but I'm not like I can survive without it. So I would put myself here. So yeah, you'll see that when you click on the plot, it'll reveal everybody else's answers at that point. So yeah, some of the analytics that I built beneath the plot, one that I'm really proud of is this like globe visualization. So I don't know if anybody ever played the Nintendo Wii, but this was kind of inspired by that. So this is showing where people answered from around the world, which I think just like fosters that sense of community and engagement. Here's a time-lapse view. So this is showing when people answered throughout the day. And unsurprisingly, there's a lot of people on it right now. So that's that big spike at the current time. I built out this like zones feature. So this is basically a more aggregated view of the data, where you can see like kind of just for each question, like there are way more people answering that are night owls. And then on the coffee front, there's a lot of people that don't drink coffee, and then a lot of people that like are sort of into coffee like me. On the similarity front, this is a view that shows you like how mainstream your answer is. So what it does is it grabs the 50% of responses that are closest to yours, and then colors them. And so if your area of if the purple area is very small, that means you answered very similarly to a lot of people. And if it's very large, then that means that you kind of had a more niche answer. And then lastly, a correlation. So I don't know if this is surprising, but there is really not much of a correlation between these two axes. But I have found a couple interesting correlations over my like almost 1 year of maintaining this project. As far as the text share that I was talking about, you can get that from hitting this button. And then this is what it looks like. This actually took a lot of like iteration and design for me to come up with something I was happy with. But I found that this like, I don't know what you call it, this like spectrum, like one-dimensional spectrum graph thing with the checkbox ended up working really well. And then as far as the guessing experience, you can get that from hitting this button and then sending the link to your friend. And this is the experience that they would see. So I don't know, like maybe I'm guessing that I would be here. So it shows you how far away your guess was from their actual response. And then it gives you a letter grade so you can shame your friends. Great, I see some questions coming in. Thank you for the kind words about the globe. John, no, currently, this is actually something people have asked about. Currently, I don't like expose this as a platform or anything like that, but it's definitely something people have asked about. Somebody asked about it in like an enterprise setting because I guess they wanted to run some polls for their company. So I think I've kind of like put this project to rest for now, but I think if I ever feel like really motivated to keep working on it, I think that would be a really cool way to go. Yes, I could probably charge for that. Thank you, Nikki. Great, so that's that project. If you were interested specifically in these two projects, the Wordle one and the Communal Plot, I've actually done longer write-ups for the Nightingale, the online Nightingale publication, where I talk a little bit more about the code and some of the technical decisions and things like that. So yeah, that's you can find that through the Nightingale website. The last demo I want to talk about is a project I did visualizing climate change. So this one is called Our Reddening Globe. And so you'll see where kind of the inspiration for the globe and the communal plot came from. So yeah, I think the main takeaway from this that I'll show is that I think data viz is at least as much of an art as it is a science. And with art, it's often a matter of finding inspiration. So I'm not like super big in social media, but I try to curate the social media that I do use to be like artistic works and technical works that I find inspiring. And one of those creators that I really like following is Ksenia Kondrashova, who's based in Georgia. And she published this code pen a year or two ago, probably a couple years ago now, that is a 3D globe. And I just thought this was so cool. I thought it was like such a playful but like elegant way to display geographical data. And I thought it would be really cool to use in a data viz. I didn't really have any projects in mind, so I just kind of took a note of it and just sat on it for a couple months. And then a few months after that, I came across the set of climate change visualizations by a Finnish scientist named Antti Lipponen. And so this is showing temperature anomaly, like changes kind of broken out geographically. So the countries go around the circumference of the circle, and you can see the regions in like the inner part of the circle, and it's showing which countries and which geographies got warmer over time. So that kind of clicked for me that I thought this would be a really cool use case for combining this, this data set that lends itself really well to change over time geographically with this globe visualization. And so I was thinking about what I could produce that would combine these two. And the big like kind of aha moment for this project was that I realized that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I think, they expose data where you can essentially pass in arbitrary latitude, longitude values and get estimated like climate data for over 100 years for any point. And so once I realized that that was possible, I thought that this idea would be possible too. So this is the visualization I came up with that combined sort of these two unrelated ideas. And I'll show you the live demo real quick. Great. So this is the Our Reddening Globe project that I did. So yeah, the data actually goes all the way back to 1880, which is pretty incredible. And I have to update it for 2024, but as of now, it goes all the way up to 2023. And I think it's just like a really cool way to show that the trend is really undeniable when you like look at it from like the global view. I don't know, something you'll hear often is like from like skeptics of this type of data is like, oh, like this one particular region was very cold this year. But this visualization, I think, does a good job in showing that you do have these like random blue blips every now and then, but the overall trend is pretty undeniable. And one trick I really like doing in my data visualizations is supplementing different types of visuals together. So like the globe, I think, is really good at showing you a ton of geospatial data at once in like a very imprecise way because it's just colors. But it only does it for 1 year. So I tried to pair that with this more like traditional diverging column chart, which gives you more precision and it gives you like a full view of the entire time span from 1880 to 2023. So that's just a trick I found works really well. Great. So that concludes the demo portion. I wanted to chat a bit about how I think about tools and just technical approach in general. So my general philosophy here is I tend to view tools and coding languages as being on a spectrum, or like the software engineer word would be a stack, where at the top of the stack you have these like drag and drop tools, really easy to use relatively, but not a lot of customization. And as you sort of go down the spectrum, you have like super bespoke, like super code heavy. You control every pixel on the screen, and then all kinds of tools in between. So the way I try to think about it is to really be thoughtful about what my goal is and what my constraints are, and then kind of start from the top and go down as far down as I need to go with my goals and my constraints. So for example, like if my boss at work like sends me like a CSV or a JSON or something and just asks me to like what the trend of this data is, I will definitely not build anything bespoke for that. I'll probably just plug it into Google Sheets or Excel. But a lot of my personal projects tend to err more on the code heavy customization side. So that's where just I ended up doing a lot of my work in. And what's really exciting, I think, about like the present day of data viz is that this like in between space between like data wrapper and flourish, there's all kinds of like you can get a lot of that heavy customization in a more drag and drop, easier to use way. And I think that that's just great. So this is like a real quick technical aside that I think is helpful to talk about. So there are really two main ways of drawing like bespoke custom things on the web, and that's Canvas and SVG. So Canvas, the analogy I use is that it literally is like painting on a canvas, and SVG is more like building with Legos. So what I mean by that is that with HTML Canvas, you have like pretty much full control over all of the pixels that you're drawing on the screen, but the browser doesn't actually know anything about what you're drawing on the screen. So if you want to draw something new, you essentially have to wipe the canvas and start drawing everything all over again. And the browser can't hook into what's in it. So things like accessibility and like adding tooltips and things like that are by and large much harder to do or much more custom. Whereas SVG is vector based. So instead of like this pixel by pixel manipulation, you're using formulas to describe visuals. And this ends up giving it lots of good properties. Like the browser can kind of manage all of the elements in it. So it is more accessible out of the box. It's way higher fidelity. So as you zoom in and out, because it's described using formulas, it'll maintain its fidelity. And yeah, so these are just like the two modes of thinking when you're really want to do bespoke work on the web. So I tend to do a lot of Canvas because I've gotten into this like generative art world, and it's just really big in that space. And so I use a lot of Canvas tools like p5.js for my data viz, which is a little bit atypical compared to just using D3, but it's interesting. And like it is probably the best way to get like really smooth animations like I have for the Communal Plot. And for the Wordle example too, I think that's about the point where SVG and like D3 wouldn't really work well because there are like tens of thousands of those lines that you're updating, at 60 frames per second. So anyway, these days I do a lot of P5, some 3.js for anything 3D, and then a bit of D3, although I definitely am not a D3 expert. For P5, I think Dea Bankova also recommended this, but I would really highly recommend The Coding Train by Daniel Schiffman, which is a YouTube series, and he does a great job starting from the beginning. He assumes like zero coding knowledge, so it's a great place to start. And for D3, there's all kinds of tutorials, but I often go back to Karan Kelleher's YouTube channel. For less bespoke things, like the bar chart I showed for the climate project, I'm a big fan of Vega Lite, which is essentially, it is like to JavaScript what ggplot is to R. So it's much more declarative. You don't have to like specify each shape or each pixel. You kind of describe a chart and it generates it for you using the like grammar of graphics logic. So that's what I use when I just need something like more out of the box. And there's a really good YouTube channel walking through the basics of Vega Lite by Dr. Lace Padilla. So that's kind of like the visuals side of things. I do most of my work in web pages, so there's this whole framework around the visualization that I have to think of. So yeah, to this day, nobody's really figured out a good way to do web development that doesn't involve HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you're looking to do interactive or even static web-based stuff, this is something you're going to have to at least be familiar with. I would really recommend the Odin project and Free Code Academy as two free resources to gain some knowledge in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. For things that are highly dynamic, like some of the visualizations I've shown you today, using a front-end framework like React or Vue or Svelte is super valuable. So I actually tend to use Vue for a lot of my projects. But for data viz, I would actually recommend Svelte, just because I think there's like this big literature of people combining D3 and Svelte. And there's so many tutorials on it. And from what I've seen, the syntax is also way lighter than Vue, and especially like lighter than React. So I would recommend Svelte. I just like a lot of the projects I started doing a couple years ago used Vue, and at the time it was like more mature in the web ecosystem. But if I was learning from scratch, I'd probably try Svelte first. And then for styling of like the rest of the web page around the visualization, I use Tailwind, which is highly polarizing in the web development community, but I love it. The most valuable thing that it does is it gives you a design system out of the box. So like the typography and the colors and the spacing of all of your non-visualization elements will largely be handled by something like Tailwind. It's kind of similar to Bootstrap, was kind of the OG version of that. And then when I need to do like more data crunching, I'm big on SQL and Python. Obviously, R is really great too for this. Again, would recommend Free Code Academy, and I think Udacity actually has a really good like data science Python course. So, and I guess the elephant in the room with all this stuff right now is AI. I think there are a lot of really valid concerns with AI. Where I've landed on using it for my own work is that I use it pretty sparingly, primarily for things I can verify myself. So I would never ask it to do a data analysis, but I would ask it to do code that I can run and check to see if it's right. I try to use it for things that will free me up creatively. So anything that's like tedious and boilerplatey, which you often get with like Canvas coding and D3 coding, I'll try to offload that to the AI so that I can focus more on the creative value add. One trick I like doing is training AI on code that I've written. So like feeding it in code that I've written, and that way it spits back out code that looks like code I would have written. And then I like using it for doing more than learning. And I think that's like historically always been the same thing. Like you do things to learn it, but AI's created this situation where you can do something without understanding it. So that's just worth being thoughtful about. Great. So I want to just kind of close with some tips on how you can get in a creative headspace for your next data project. So a huge unlock for me has just been joining a lot of communities. So obviously we're all here via DVS. So that's a great community to join, but then also like more domain specific communities. So I'm part of like a generative art, creative coding Discord, and a sports data group on Slack. And you'll just like meet really interesting people, learn about really interesting data sets, and just it'll just kind of like, for me, it just kind of energizes me and puts me in a creative headspace. I think local meetups are also a great place to start to get inspired. We have a really robust one here where I live in Washington, D.C. That's actually where I met Simran and how I got connected to do this. Yeah, there's something about like that face-to-face interaction and like seeing people that are really passionate about data that I think can be really inspiring. And lastly, I think online challenges are a really good way to challenge yourself and push yourself creatively. So there's the 30-day chart challenge, which last year happened in spring. I'm not sure when it's happening this year. There's a map one if you're interested in GIS. January for generative art, which just finished last month. And there's like never any pressure to do all 30 days of prompts for these, but just kind of being a part of it, doing them when you get the chance to, and seeing what other people are doing can be really creatively invigorating and give you like a jump off point for a bigger data project. Something I try to do is surround myself with work I find inspiring. Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways to do this. You can like curate a social media feed to be like customized to the types of projects that you're interested in seeing. Joining those communities, like I mentioned, will be a good way to do this. But in general, just like kind of synthesizing and putting as much inspiration into your head as possible. is just always going to be a helpful thing. A big one for me, and maybe like something you noticed as I talked about the inspirations for all my projects, was to really like be mindful of thoughts that enter your head that sound like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if like this thing existed, right? So whether it's like Wordle or the communal plot or whatever. And that doesn't mean you have to like build something for all of them or even any of them. You know, when I was doing a lot of these creative projects, it was kind of a different season of my life where I had a lot more time to do things like that. But just kind of like noting them and being mindful. And then maybe like, you know, down the line, a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll have, you know, more time and energy, and you'll have this like backlog of cool ideas that have at one point been in your head. I'd really recommend you to understand your own creative process. I strongly believe that it's different than your productive process. So like, for example, if somebody asked me to like, I don't know, like crank out a report or like 10 reports in a week or something, that is like very productive. Like I kind of have to just sit down and start and do it. But as far as like creativity goes, it's way more nebulous. We don't really understand how it works. There's like this playfulness aspect to it. So just like recognizing that those are different things and you can cultivate them differently. You know, for a lot of people, like long walks really help, or like I have a lot of really good ideas in the shower, you know, about my next project. So like just kind of thinking about that and understanding what gets you in the creative headspace. And lastly, I think creative projects are a great way to learn what it is you love about this field that we're all in of data viz. It's a low stakes way to try different things, to work across topics you're personally interested in. And like there are so many angles to approach data viz from, whether you're interested in storytelling or building like exploratory things, building dashboards, whatever it is. It's a really safe space for you to learn about what it is you really love about this field. And all of the work you're doing, there might not be like an immediate or any monetary, you know, payoff from it, but they're all an investment into yourself, right? Like you will learn skills, you will learn what you're interested in, you'll network. So I'm a huge proponent of them. They've been really good for me. And that's all I had. Just catching up on some of the questions here.
Thank you so much. That was so informative. I love how, I feel like there were a lot of concrete strategies shared, which is super helpful for me. I love what you shared about the quarter life, creative, existential crisis. I feel like I'm going through that right now.
It's a rite of passage.
For everyone tuning in, feel free to put any questions that you have in the comments. But I can get us started with a question. I'm curious about like what makes a project successful to you on a personal level, and like successful in quotes, because we all have different meanings of what that is. So just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a big believer in being really conscious about what your goals are for any like project that you're doing. And that doesn't mean that they have to be like really specific or like really, I don't know, like ambitious. But like for the communal plot, my biggest goal was just I want to make something that I can use with my friends every day. And that is true. Like I accomplished that, so I achieved my goals. And there were all these like side effects along the way where I learned a lot. A lot of people have like used it and had great ideas about it and said they loved it or said like, oh, you could do this instead. And that's all great. But like the main goal for that project was just like, oh, like it would be cool if this existed. And so I worked on making it exist. But then I think it's also very valid to have more quantifiable goals, like wanting to start a small business around this like data idea that you have that might make people's lives easier, or wanting to learn a very specific skill. So I don't know, it's kind of cliche, but I think like anything that accomplishes your goal is a success.
And as a follow up to that, like before
Mhm.
you start each project, you sort of have like a goal ideation reflection moment. Like I really loved the part you shared about defining your niche before starting
Mhm.
um, per 36. And so I'm just curious whether you do that with like every project.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we definitely did it more consciously for Per 36 because it was a project we were doing together. And I don't know, I think that as soon as you introduce like other people, you get all of these benefits of working in a team, but then you also have like so much can get lost in communication. So yeah, I don't know, maybe my experience is that like when I work in groups, I do have a much more conscious like planning phase and like documents we're sharing with each other and like meetings about the project before we write a single line of code. But then for like the Wordle project, like that was something that I started just like in a coffee shop because I was kind of, I don't know, like curious and interested too. And so I started the static visualization there, and then it kind of like naturally, um, I don't know, progressed into the interactive version. So I think that there's, yeah, like all kinds of different valid ways to do it. But maybe because the first project was a collaboration, I didn't want to impose my like my just like free form creative thinking into a project I was doing with another person. So maybe that's the difference.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I'll ask one more question, and then we have a couple of questions happening in the chat.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, as you've been working on more and more personal projects in the last few years, how
Mhm.
has your thinking about data visualization shifted over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually did some writing on this a couple weeks ago that I shared out, and Simran, if you have the link to share that, that might be helpful. It's the Per 36 article that's about like visualizing data as an art. But broadly speaking, I used to think that data was very truthful, I guess. Like it is very objective, it's very scientific, it's very precise. And so therefore data visualization is also all of those things. But where I've landed on now, and as I mentioned in the talk, is that I think data viz is um, almost more of an art than it is a science. Just because there are so many ways to visualize the same data, and it's like so many levels of abstraction on top of like the truth, right? So like the way we collect the data, the way we visualize the data, the way we communicate, any insights that we find, and all of that is an art, um, or craft or whatever you want to call it. And so I think like my way of thinking about it has changed a little bit. I do think about it more artistically. Um, I kind of draw analogies to like writing or painting or other types of art forms where there is like photorealism in painting, and that is like a form of painting. But then there's also like really abstract stuff and like impressionism and all of these different ways to approach it. And I think data is very similar. Like you can, turn some knobs and like pull some levers and make a visualization more emotionally impactful or just more beautiful or just hyper precise, like in a business intelligence or science context. Um, so yeah, I think that's the biggest like paradigm shift for me is that it is an art. The only hard and fast rule I have for data viz is like don't be unethical. Beyond that, I think there's a lot of room for creativity.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't checked out the article, please do. It's super informative, and it's such a great think piece um, on just more reflecting on your craft of data viz. I'm going to turn to some of the questions we have going in the chat. I love what you shared about the surface area of luck, and Heather also asked about that. So, when could you elaborate on ways you can set yourself up for good luck that someone pivoting into the field can do?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think Ali Torban also did a great job talking about this in the last Q&A, where like I don't know, I think we all kind of have this idea that like if I do good enough work, then somebody is just gonna like come up to me and offer me my dream job, or at least like that's a delusion that I had at one point. but then I did realize that like you do need to network. You do need to like engage with the community, especially in a field like data viz where it is so visual and you can like just go out and start building a portfolio. Um, I think like having something you can share, um, meeting people that can like lead you to opportunities you're really excited about. These are all things you can take proactive steps towards. Um, but then you do also have to get lucky. Like just doing those things won't immediately guarantee any outcome of success, especially like I don't know in this economy. So yeah, I think I don't know. It's like a matter of going from like no chance of me like breaking into this field that I'm in to some chance, and then also that like chance coming to fruition.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think just like the consistence piece you mentioned in the talk too is a really important way for increasing the luck surface area.
Mhm.
Another question that we had is how do you know when to stop trying to create what's in your head and not get into the sort of paralysis that comes from doing tutorials over and over again?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like I have a bunch of ideas written down in my notes app that haven't come to fruition. And I don't know, I'm kind of like besides that article I did a couple weeks ago, I haven't really like done anything creatively, like data wise, for a couple months. So I think I don't know. I definitely have different seasons. Like I have seasons where I'm really motivated to create, then I have seasons where I'm like really motivated to like consume and surround myself with inspiration, and then sometimes I'm just like dated out and I don't want to do it. So I think it has to feel like fun and engaging for a side project. I think work doesn't have to feel that way, but for a side project, if you're like choosing to spend your energy on it and it starts to feel stressful or it starts to feel like high friction, then I would definitely encourage like stepping away. I actually did that with Communal Plot. Like I started it and I was like pretty upset with my choice of using hexagons because hexagons are like kind of hard to work with in Canvas. So I just stopped working on it for a few weeks, and then I picked it back up, and I was like, okay, I can power through this now. And then I got really excited about some of the other features I was building for it. So yeah, I think definitely like whatever feels like you're learning and whatever feels like it's creatively energizing for you.
And we have a question about picking up coding languages when you don't have a computer science background. Do you have any advice for folks in that path on what to focus on? Because it can be super overwhelming to, wade through all the different tutorials and
For
ways
sure.
to learn
Yeah.
code out there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And even as somebody who did like study computer science, most of what I learned in my degree and like most of the languages and frameworks that I learned are not things I'm using. Um, but I do think that there's like a certain way of thinking systematically and a way of thinking, yeah, pragmatically that a coding language can help teach you, and that'll be really helpful. And luckily, those are pretty universal, at least across like the main sort of popular programming languages. So I don't know if I have any specific advice. I think I saw that this person is asking about Python and SQL, and I think that those are excellent places to start. Specifically, I think R and Python are really good because you can kind of get everything you need from them in terms of they have like really rich data viz libraries, and you can do the number crunching. And there's like so much literature about how to do those things in those languages that I guess I would recommend starting with R or Python. And then if you really were interested in like adding that dynamic element and the interactivity, then having one of those under your belt and like transitioning to the quirky world of web development would probably be a good way to go.
And since we're at time, just one last question. Nikki's wondering what your starting Wordle word is. And then
Oh,
I was wondering if maybe you could end with some parting words of advice for our early career folks.
yeah, for sure. It's a great question. I usually use Slate, Slate. It's not like scientific how I got there. I just feel like it's a good word. Has two vowels and some pretty common consonants, and a lot of words start with S, as we saw. So I start with Slate, but sometimes I'll mix it up if I'm feeling fun and frisky. Um, and then as far as parting advice, yeah, I mean it's like super cliche, but I think it's a great idea to learn. Learn all of the rules, learn kind of the language of data visualization, learn what works well, learn like standard chart types, and then figure out ways you can experiment with them in your personal projects. And like I said, there are so many ways to approach data viz. Um, Between like exploratory, explanatory, static, interactive, and there are so many fields. Like every field has data, right? Like whether you're into sports or civics or public health or anything. That those like there's so many like cross sections of things you could do that people probably aren't doing. And yeah, just that if you have the time and are at a place in your life where you can pick up a creative data project, then yeah, you should give it a shot.
All right. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much, Shri, for your time. This was super helpful for me at a personal level. So I'm sure I can speak for all of our early career audience too, that everyone got something out of this. And that's it for now. See you all at a future Q&A.
Great, thanks for having me.